people. A very talented author and illustrator, Theodore Seuss Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss. He was a man of his times. I say that because Seuss shared his world, his beliefs through the many books he wrote. I grew up on Dr. Seuss books, and I read them to my own daughter. And I used them quite extensively in my first grade classroom, where I taught children beginning reading. But my title suggests that there is some controversy surrounding Dr. Seuss. A while back, Theodore Seuss Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss, made headlines. The First Lady, Melania Trump, wanted to donate Dr. Seuss books to a library, and the librarian refused the books. The librarian explained, Dr. Seuss is a bit of a cliche, a tired and worn ambassador for children's literature. And she went on to say, his books are steeped in racist mockery. I couldn't believe that, what I was reading. As a teacher, I knew Dr. Seuss books to be entertaining and almost beloved reading material that tackled social issues and values. In fact, in first grade, we used to have a Dr. Seuss day where the children would bring all their Seuss books to school, and we'd spent the whole day doing just Dr. Seuss things. Well, this controversy became an interesting conversation starter with people. I'd stand on lines, those long lines for something, and we'd start talking. I learned what Dr. Seuss books meant to them. No one felt they were racist. In fact, they were very willing to share their interpretations of some of their favorite stories. I decided to do some research behind the alleged racism, and today's talk is a result of that search. First, I wanted to share some background information on the life of Dr. Seuss. Theodore Seuss Geisel was born in Springfield, Massachusetts on March 4th, 1904. He graduated from Dartmouth College in 1925. Although he pursued a doctorate, he never completed his degree. His first work was in advertising as an illustrator and cartoonist. Some might remember the Flip Bug Spray ad campaign. In 1929, he worked as an illustrator for Judge magazine, and one of his early illustrations came up for auction in 2015. No one bought the illustration, which depicted a racist scene and used a slur to describe Black people. Rally cries against Dr. Seuss and his work included the fact that he wrote an entire minstrel show in college and performed as the main character in full blackface. Critics began analyzing his work, looking for bias, racism, and even sexism. In light of their alleged findings, I ask a couple of questions. Always the teacher, ask questions that you yourself will have to answer for yourself. Should Dr. Seuss books be promoted, particularly to our youngest naive readers? Do we read a work and take the literary historicist approach? Meaning, do we read it in the context of the time it was written, such as reading Huckleberry Finn? Do we view it through our own cultural lens at a time of political correctness? Do we label it racist, as some people have? Do we let later works modify how we read the questionable as part of the entire Seuss canon? Before you decide, I'd like to share some of my research, as well as some of the books Seuss wrote with their social and political messages. I do have a caveat. Seuss is not here to defend himself. Also, interpretations are subjective. I'd like to share a scene that came from the movie Back to School that illustrates this point. I tried to get a clip of it to show here in the PowerPoint, but it does have some foul language, and so I deemed it inappropriate. But in the movie, Rodney Dangerfield is a wealthy man going back to school to obtain a college degree with his son. And he doesn't want to work at being a college student. He has enough money to buy people to write his term papers. In it, he pays Kurt Vonnegut, the author, to write a paper on Kurt Vonnegut himself. Subsequently, Rodney's character fails his term paper for not knowing a thing about Vonnegut, his professor says. So he calls up Kurt Vonnegut and chews him out and tells him he's not going to pay him because he doesn't know a thing about Kurt Vonnegut. So again, the interpretation is subjective. There are other examples of Dr. Seuss's work that have come under scrutiny. So let me move ahead. During the war years of World War II, Seuss illustrated over 400 political war posters and newspaper articles, which are now criticized for their caricatures of the Japanese. These illustrations were done in the years of 1939 to 1949. 45, excuse me, 39 to 45. This was the years of World War II and Yellow Peril. Is a type of caricature that is found in Dr. Seuss's first book, To Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street, which was written in 1937 prior to World War II. The story follows a boy named Marco who describes a parade of imaginary people and vehicles traveling along the road Mulberry Street. In an elaborate fantasy story, he dreams up to tell his father at the end of his work. To make his story more interesting, Marco imagines progressively more elaborate scenes based around the horse and wagon. In the book, a character, described as Chinese, has 2 lines for eyes, carries chopsticks and a bowl of rice, and wears traditional Japanese-style type shoes. This is one that they consider racist. Oops, let me go back. This illustration, along with the fact that Theodore Geisel advocated for Japanese internment camps during World War II, led many to make a claim of racism. But remember the context. Mulberry Street was written in an age of discrimination. Some of that discrimination included Aunt Jemima, Little Black Sambo, and Amos and Andy. In 1937, Chinese imports were equated with cheap, inferior goods. And the repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act didn't occur until 1943. Our society at that time was used to images that we now consider unacceptable. You may or may not judge Seuss for his history, but I will ask you to consider the historical perspective in which it was done, as well as to note that Seuss revisited this book in the later years and changed the illustrations to address these concerns. I'd like to look at other Dr. Seuss books to see how the social and political nature crept in, sometimes inadvertently, and in later years intentionally. If I Ran the Zoo, written in 1950, is the story of young Gerald McGrew and his dream of running the most outrageous zoo. Gerald would let all the mundane animals go and get animals of the more unusual kind. In this book, 2 men are said to be from Africa. Africa are shown shirtless, shoeless, and wearing gray skirts as they carry an exotic animal. The racism is hidden beneath the grand idea of traveling around the world to bring different and rare animals. The concept of gathering animals, sometimes people from all over the world, would make the ideal zoo of which kids could only dream. However, in each of these adventures to different countries, Dr. Seuss does include racist and stereotypical remarks about people living in these countries. The story makes fun of Asians having slanted eyes, jokes about Russian names ending in the ski or sky, depicts Africans as almost ape-like individuals in short tutu-like skirts. The children might be ignorant of the stereotypes and racism, but adults today would not. So how do we treat Dr. Seuss's work today? Do we put aside the questionable books? Do we judge and disparage Dr. Seuss, or do we take them in the context of the time in which the books were written? Some individuals have now taken to analyzing Dr. Seuss's 42 books for their depictions of human of color, of which there are only 45 out of 2,240. And of those depictions, all are only presented in subservient, exotified, or dehumanized roles. And I want to make a note here that women of color are missing entirely from Dr. Seuss's book. So how do we, again, I ask, how do we begin to value or devalue Dr. Seuss's books? As I did mention earlier, Dr. Seuss changed his illustrations in his original book. To think I saw it on Mulberry Street. He had a change of heart towards the Japanese following the end of the war and the end of his job as a war propagandist. In 1953, he visited Japan and viewed the aftermath of the atomic bombs. He returned to the United States following that trip and wrote the book, Horton Hears, which was published in 1954. In the story, an elephant, Horton, finds a speck of dust floating in the jungle of Newell. Upon investigation of the speck, he discovers the tiny city of Whoville and its residents, the Who, which he can hear because big ears help, but he cannot see. Horton forms a friendship with the mayor of Whoville and promises to transport Whoville to safety. However, Horton encounters opposition from his jungle neighbors who don't want to believe in the existence of Whoville. The book's theme, which is widely quoted, is a person's a person no matter how small. The book was dedicated to Seuss's friend, Mitsuyi, forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, Nakamura, Dean of Doshisha University in Kyoto. The book's message of inclusivity, of humanity and equality makes it one of Seuss's most popular books. There's also an underlying social issue of nonconformity, of standing up to peer pressure, which makes Horton a hero. At the end of the book, the main jungle naysayer, Jojo the bird, says, "From now on, you know what I'm planning to do? From now on, I'm going to protect them with you," referring to the Who's. The book's message of inclusivity was something that Seuss intended to convey. However, its underlying theme of using your voice, of speaking up to make a difference, may or may not have been planned. And I just want to note on the side, the pro-life movement used this theme from Horton Hears, a person's a person no matter how small, to use for its anti-abortion campaigns. At this time, Dr. Seuss had died, so his widow was very upset by the use of this line for something other than it was intended. Other books by Dr. Seuss touch on complex social political themes are The 500 Hats of Bartholomew Covens, written in 1938. In the story, King Derwin passes with his royal procession. Bartholomew Covens removes his hat per the royal custom. Just one problem. He finds that his hat is replaced by another, and another, and another, and then another. The king consults his experts, and they try many strategies to no avail. The king threatens Bartholomew with death for something he cannot control. In this, the rules are set up to favor the king. Everyone else has to follow the king's orders and act on the king's whim, regardless of the reason. The story is said to be a depiction of an unfair class system with elements of bullying. The king does not care that what is happening is beyond Bartholomew's control. But in the end, after 500 hats are taken off, he finally winds up bareheaded and saved. I actually had a copy of this book, and it was ruined in my move when I retired. The Sneetches was written in Other Stories was written in 1953. It is a collection of stories published in 1961. It's composed of 4 separate stories with themes of tolerance, diversity, and compromise. There's the Sneetches, the Zacks, Too Many Daves, and What Was I Scared Of? The first story, the Sneetches, tells of yellow creatures called Sneetches, some who have a green star on their bellies. In the beginning, Sneetches with stars discriminate and shun those Sneetches that don't have stars. An entrepreneur named Sylvester McMonkey McBean appears and offers the Sneetches without stars the chance to get them with his star-on machine for a fee. The treatment is instantly popular, but this upsets the original star-bellied Sneetches as they are in danger of losing their special status. McBean tells them about his star-off machine, costing another hefty fee, and the Sneetches, who originally had stars, happily pay the money to have them removed in order to remain special. However, McBean does not share the prejudices of the Sneetches and allows the recently starred Sneetches through the machine as well. Ultimately, this escalates with the Sneetches running from one machine to the next. It continues until the Sneetches are penniless and McBean departs as a rich man. The Sneetches eventually learn that neither plain belly nor star belly Sneetches are superior, and they are able to get along and become friends. The story was inspired by the yellow Star of David that the Jewish people were required to wear by the Nazis. Seuss intended the story as a satire of discrimination between races and cultures. The Cat in the Hat was written in 1954. It was written in response to a Life article that claimed widespread illiteracy caused by children being bored with books, those Dick and Jane books we were talking about in the poem Everything I Learned in Kindergarten. Dr. Seuss sought to write a book using the Dolch word list. And for those who don't know what the Dolch words are, they are the 100 frequently most words used in the English language. Think of the A's, the, and, us, you, mom, dad, cat, dog, play, look, see. So he wrote them in a more exciting and entertaining way. In the story, the cat shows up at the house of Sally and her brother one rainy day when their mother is away. Despite the repeated objections of the children's fish, the cat shows the children a few of his tricks in an attempt to entertain them. In the process, he and his companions, Thing 1 and Thing 2, wreck the house. The children and the fish become more and more alarmed until the cat produces a machine that he uses to clean everything up, and he disappears just before the children's mother comes home. Now, some claim that the cat is a dictatorial power and his helpers are representative of the underclass or working people. He recognizes the potential of his helpers and he sees the need for a more democratic process. Others have claimed that the cat illustration has its roots in black-faced minstrels. I don't know about you, but all I see is a tuxedo cat and a book that met its goal of using the Dolch words in an entertaining way. How the Grinch Stole Christmas was published in 1957. It follows the Grinch, a grumpy, solitary creature who attempts to put an end to Christmas by stealing Christmas-themed items from the homes of the nearby town, Whoville, on Christmas Eve. Miraculously, the Grinch realizes that Christmas may not all be about money and presents. Its other theme is one of perspective. If one views life through another's perspective, it might actually make a difference and make one a better person. And in the story, the Grinch's heart grew 10 times as big. In Yertle the Turtle, written in 1958, it revolves around Yertle the Turtle, king of the pond. Unsatisfied with the stone that serves as his throne, He commands the other turtles to stack themselves beneath him so he can see further and expand his kingdom. But the turtles under him are in pain. The story was written in 1958, and it raised questions about justice, political rights, political authority, and the responsibilities of a ruler to his or her subjects. Yertle's treatment of the turtles who are hungry and in pain readily lends itself to a discussion on fairness and the inherent worth and dignity of all creatures, one of our UU principles. Some say that Seuss's book is an allegory to the rise and fall of Hitler, and some schools remove the book for being too political and controversial. I think it should be regularly required reading for our heads of corporations and our newly elected statesmen. Green Eggs and Ham, personal favorite, written in 1960. The story revolves around a child trying to convince an adult to try some odd food. The worn-out, mentally exhausted adult finally relents and eats the green eggs and ham to find he likes them. I probably could recite this. Would you, could you, on a boat, would you, could you, with a goat, in a box, with a fox. I could go on and on. The theme of the child saving the adult or / parent of the child's empowerment is a theme in which every child can relate. How many of us grew up with the Alka-Seltzer slogan, try it, you'll like it, and how that led to, would it lead to heartburn or not? I wonder if those green eggs and ham did. This is the book that I was discussing, on that line that I started with when we talked about the librarian turning down the donation of Dr. Seuss books. And a gentleman just went on and on about how this book is all about peer pressure. He didn't see it as an adult and a child. He saw it as a child with an older incorrigible. I disagreed with him. He tried to use the analogy of smoking cigarettes and taking drugs as part of his defense. But I don't think Dr. Seuss would want anyone using his words in harmful ways. I have all but good intentions thought for Dr. Seuss. A lesser known story, I Can Lick 30 Tigers Today and Other Stories, was written in 1969. It has a political theme of rebellion against hierarchy leading to democracy. In a town called Katzenstein, inhabited by cats, King Louis Katz orders another cat, Phooey, to carry his tail so that it does not drag on the ground. In turn, Phooey becomes conscious of his own tail dragging and makes another cat carry it. This process continues with each cat forced to carry another's tail until the last cat, Zooey, Katzenstein, realizes there's no one to carry his tail and protests. It concludes with each cat carrying its own tail. Unlike many other Seuss works, it includes the overt political message that Katzenstein is more democratic at the end. Leaders may also draw lessons about equality and personal responsibility. King Louis is an apparent reference to the French Revolution, though this Louis retains his crown and his head. Here comes another one of my favorites. The Lorax, written in 1971. It chronicles the plight of the environment, the truffula trees, and the Lorax, the activist character who speaks for the trees and confronts the onceler, the industrialist, who causes environmental destruction. Boy, I think this one should be read quite a bit today. It is a cautionary tale with an important message. If we do not collectively take responsibility for the stewardship of the environment, then our own world will soon be like the one left behind in the story. Its message of the interrelatedness of all parts, living and non-living, was written at the time of the ecology movement, when people were recognizing the conflict between the overuse of natural resources in man-made production, as well as the mindless consumption as the dark side of capitalism. corporate greed, excessive consumerism. It urged activism before it's too late, which is a message that still resonates today. Marvin K Mooney, Will You Please Go Now, was written in 1972. It's about a young child who needs to go to bed and asked to go in many ways. This came at a time as the American society had transitioned from the 1950s patriarchal, I told you so, you'll do it because I said so approach of child rearing to the Dr. Seuss era of exploration, experimentation, and discussion within boundaries. I include this book in this discussion because Seuss used this book for political purposes himself. Sorry, my mouth is going dry. In a 1974 collaboration with Art Buchwald, Dr. Seuss crossed out Marvin K. Mooney wherever it occurred in a copy of his story and replaced it with Richard M. Nixon. With Dr. Seuss's approval, it was reprinted with the markup as a newspaper column, in the Washington Post. President Richard Nixon resigned 10 days later on August 9th as a result of the Watergate scandal. And so I return to the questions I posed earlier and ask, can we forgive Dr. Seuss? When we celebrate Dr. Seuss, we don't just celebrate a cat sporting a hat, dubious green eggs and ham, or a Grinch who hated Christmas. When we celebrate Dr. Seuss, we celebrate Theodore Geisel, a man who had flaws, but who also had the understanding and courage to change his views to better himself, and perhaps even better the world. I like to think of Seuss as the Grinch whose heart grew larger. I believe we need to look at his earlier work in the context of the time and look at how he used his popularity to write on relevant topics that many still resonate today. One of his most famous books that came posthumously was the Places You'll Go, which is often given as a graduation gift. Scholars have weighed in. They suggested that teachers receive training in cultural sensitivity and be given access to other books with diverse characters. If children do read the books, the scholars suggest that adults approach the readings in an informed and critical way. Others argue against the historical perspective. Some are quoted here, I don't think nostalgia is a defense. Another one said, affection is not a defense. Above all, Dr. Seuss used children's literature to teach tolerance and acceptance, and most of all, imagination. We just need to decide if there are better books to teach what we want to teach our children. Dr. Seuss himself, remember I started to say that he couldn't talk for himself right now, but at one time in an interview, Dr. Seuss admitted his books were propagandistic. He said, the morals sneak in as they do in all drama. Every story's got to have a winner, so I happen to make the good guys win. I can't help but wonder that if Dr. Seuss lived now, during this era of social media and instantaneous comments of Twitter and sound bites, would Seuss have been able to experience growth and grace as he did? In his time, he had the time and the space to think and to work out his messages in his books, and yes, to change some of those messages that were controversial. I'd like to end this little talk with one of my favorite Seuss books, and I do have an original copy of this, called Thidwick the Big-Hearted Moose, written in 1948. This is the book that I would always read on Dr. Seuss Day. And our school teachers were asked to record their favorite stories, and this is probably my most favorite. I have a lot, if you could tell. A bug and subsequent animals take up permanent residence in the moose's antlers, and Thidwick says, for a host above all must be nice to his guest. The heartless residents of Thidwick's antlers, bears and mice and rabbits and birds and bugs, invite other animals to live with them until the end when Thidwick is chased by hunters. Fortunately, he sheds his antlers and his guests just before the hunters shoot. Those guests on his antlers wind up being the wall-mounted trophies of the hunters, and Thidwick is left to munch the moose moss on the other side of the lake. The story explores the limits of hospitality and sharing. For me, it says, learn to speak up for oneself. And it makes me think of the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. And that was a quote by Gandhi. In my home, there will always be shelves of Dr. Seuss's books. And true, I have them. Those I've kept from my daughter's youth, those that I used in my classroom, and those I hope to share with my grandchildren, if ever I am blessed to have any. I'm still waiting. I hope you will continue to share Dr. Seuss too, and I'll let you answer those questions I asked earlier for yourself.